6 years after Hollywood legend James Garner passed away. His daughter, Gigi Garner, accidentally discovered a shocking secret among her father's old belongings: the final letter he had written to screen icon Doris Day. It was not an ordinary farewell. The words in the letter read like a late confession, filled with regret and quiet anguish, from a man long regarded as one of Hollywood's most graceful and charismatic gentlemen. On screen, especially in the series Maverick, Garner always appeared relaxed and confident, wearing his trademark smile and effortless charm. But behind that image was a man who had silently carried many burdens: the pressures of fame, the artificial nature of the entertainment world, and even physical pain that few people, not even those closest to him, fully understood. What continues to puzzle many people is this: why, in the final days of his life, did he choose Doris Day as the person to confide in and share his deepest thoughts? The scars of Oklahoma and the weight of the Purple Heart. James Scott Garner was born on April 7, 1928, in Norman, Oklahoma, into a world of scarcity. The Great Depression was tightening its grip, but the first true blow came when James was only 5 years old. His mother, Mildred, died. His father eventually remarried a woman who became a source of terror. She physically abused James and his brothers, often forcing James to wear a dress in public as a form of humiliation. To escape the violence at home, the young boy spent nights wandering the Oklahoma streets or sleeping in the woods. These periods of isolation forced an early maturity. Gigi Garner recalls her father explaining that those lonely hours taught him to observe human behavior with a sharp, empathetic eye, a trait that would later define his effortless acting style. Before the lights of Hollywood, James lived a life of grueling manual labor. He was a teenager of the Dust Bowl, working as an oil field rigger, a mechanic, a carpet layer, and a janitor. There was no glamour, only the necessity of a paycheck. In 1950, the reality of war replaced the struggle of the streets. James became the first Oklahoman drafted for the Korean War, serving in the 5th Regimental Combat Team. He was wounded twice in action. The first time, shrapnel tore into his face and hand. The second time, he was hit by friendly fire from U.S. fighter jets while diving into a foxhole. He returned home with 2 Purple Hearts and a permanent disdain for pretense. These experiences solidified his character. He grew to loathe phonies and maintained a lifelong respect for the working class, the crew members and technicians, rather than the studio executives. In the secret letter found by Gigi, James strips away the confident persona of the Hollywood lead. He admits to Doris Day that the deprivation of his youth created a permanent shadow over his success. Despite his massive earnings and global fame, he confessed, "I spent every day of my career worrying about the next paycheck and whether I was truly worthy of the space I occupied." The letter reveals that the relaxed, grinning man the world saw was a calculated mask. Behind it was a man haunted by the Oklahoma boy who never felt safe, even in a mansion in Brentwood. He told Doris that his entire career was fueled by a desperate, silent need to prove he wasn't just a lucky drifter from Norman. The reluctant icon, from a job to a legacy. James Garner did not pursue acting for the sake of art. He pursued it because he was tired of manual labor. In the early 1950s, he landed a non-speaking role in the Broadway play The Caine Mutiny Court-Martial. While observing legends like Henry Fonda, James realized his strength lay in doing nothing. He studied at the Berghoff Studio in New York, developing a naturalistic, conversational style that stood in stark contrast to the theatrical, over-the-top performances of his contemporaries. He wasn't playing a character. He was bringing the authenticity of a Korean War veteran to the screen. The breakthrough came in 1957 with Maverick. As Brett Maverick, James dismantled the traditional Western hero archetype. Brett was a card shark who preferred wit over gunfights and retreated from danger whenever possible. This reluctant hero persona became his signature. He infused the role with a dry, self-deprecating humor that made him an overnight sensation. However, it also established the Garner mold, a man of quiet morality who refused to be a caricature. He was the hero who didn't look like he was trying to be one. In the 1960s, James transitioned to the silver screen. Proving his versatility across genres, he became a staple of high-stakes cinema. The resourceful scrounger in The Great Escape, 1963. The cynical anti-war coward in The Americanization of Emily, 1964, which he cited as his personal favorite, and The Professional Racer in Grand Prix, 1966. By 1969, he was satirizing his own Western roots in Support Your Local Sheriff. Yet, behind the box office success, James was embroiled in a different kind of combat. He famously sued Warner Brothers for breach of contract during a writer's strike, and later took on Universal in a multi-million-dollar creative accounting dispute over the Rockford Files. He won both times, becoming a pioneer for actors' rights. He refused to be cheated, viewing these legal battles as a matter of principle rather than greed. In 1974, James returned to television with The Rockford Files as Jim Rockford, a private investigator who lived in a dilapidated trailer and frequently got beaten up. He redefined the detective genre. The role earned him an Emmy in 1977 and cemented his status as the everyman of Hollywood. Gigi remembers her father coming home from the set covered in real bruises. He insisted on performing many of his own stunts, including the famous J-turn in his gold Pontiac Firebird. His career found a third act in his later years. He received an Academy Award nomination for Murphy's Romance, 1985, starred alongside Clint Eastwood in Space Cowboys, 2000, and introduced himself to a new generation as the elderly Noah in The Notebook, 2004. Despite the accolades, Gigi notes that her father remained intensely modest. When they watched his films together, he would often critique his own posture or timing rather than celebrate his fame. He viewed himself as a craftsman, not a star. The letter to Doris Day, however, reveals the exhaustion behind this decades-long marathon. James confessed to her that the pressure of being the lead was a suffocating weight. He wrote about the roles he turned down out of fear or fatigue, and the soul-crushing nature of the studio system. He admitted that every legal battle he fought took a year off his life, but he felt he had no choice. In one of the letter's most poignant lines, he told Doris, "The world thinks I was being brave by suing the studios. The truth is, I was just tired of being told I wasn't worth what I brought to the table. Fighting was the only way to keep my dignity. But it cost me my peace." He revealed that the easygoing Maverick was actually a man who lived in a state of constant, defensive readiness. Marriage and family. The 58-year anchor, in August 1956, at a political rally for Adlai Stevenson. James met Lois Josephine Fleischman Clark. The attraction was instantaneous and defied the logic of the time. They married just 16 days later, on August 17, 1956, at a courthouse. Their honeymoon was a simple drive to Carmel that cost exactly $77. James would later tell Gigi, "I was just nuts about her from the second I saw her." To the public, it looked like a reckless Hollywood impulse. To James, it was the first time in his life he felt he truly belonged to someone. James didn't just marry Lois. He immediately stepped into the role of protector for her family. He adopted Lois's 9-year-old daughter, Kimberly, who was then in the arduous process of recovering from polio. In 1958, Gigi was born, completing the family unit. Despite his rising status as a leading man, James remained a homebody who detested the predatory nature of the Hollywood social scene. Gigi recalls that her father's devotion was absolute. He prioritized family dinners over studio galas and insisted on a normal upbringing for his daughters. Far removed from the paparazzi's glare, however, the marriage was not a continuous fairy tale. The immense physical and psychological toll of filming the Rockford Files, during which James was working 14-hour days and performing his own stunts, strained the relationship to a breaking point. The couple separated for 3 months in 1970 and again for 18 months starting in 1979. These periods of distance were not fueled by infidelity or scandal, but by James's need to decompress from the pressure cooker of the industry. They reconciled in 1981, a testament to their mutual resilience and Lois's steadying influence. Their union lasted nearly 58 years, ending only with James's death in 2014. Gigi notes that they survived because they viewed marriage as a pact of mutual respect rather than a temporary arrangement. In the letter discovered by Gigi, James's reflections on his marriage were stripped of romantic cliches. He wrote to Doris Day with a soldier's perspective on love. He didn't call it bliss, he called it survival. He admitted to Doris that Lois was the only person who truly knew the depth of his exhaustion. He wrote, "My marriage to Lois was like military service. It required a level of perseverance and discipline that most people today aren't willing to give. There were times I didn't think I'd make it back from the front, but she was always there holding the line. She was the only real thing in a world made of cardboard and paint." The letter reveals that James credited his wife not just for his happiness, but for his very sanity. The Midwest Bond and the Final Sunset. James Garner and Doris Day shared a rare, uncomplicated bond forged in 1963 on the sets of The Thrill of It All and Move Over. Darling. Both were products of the American Midwest, James from Oklahoma and Doris from Ohio, and they shared a fundamental, no-nonsense work ethic. Their friendship was built on unconditional trust and zero expectations. In an industry defined by transactional relationships, they were two professionals who genuinely liked each other. Doris became the one person James didn't feel the need to perform for. With her, he could simply be the weary man behind the legend. However, the physical cost of his legendary career eventually came due. James's body was a roadmap of his professional dedication. Decades of performing his own stunts in the Rockford Files led to chronic, debilitating pain. He underwent 6 or 7 knee surgeries before finally receiving a total knee replacement in 2000. In 1988, he survived quintuple bypass heart surgery. Though he finally quit his lifelong smoking habit in 2005, a severe stroke in 2008 drastically altered his quality of life. Gigi witnessed her father's stoic resilience crumble under the weight of constant physical agony. He spent his final years in a state of quiet, disciplined suffering. On July 19, 2014, at the age of 86, James Garner died of a massive heart attack, acute myocardial infarction, at his home in Brentwood. The letter discovered by Gigi was written during this period of steep physical decline. It is a document saturated with the reality of a fading icon. James used the letter to Doris to bridge the gap between his public strength and his private frailty. He didn't write about his awards or his box office numbers. He wrote about the exhaustion of living in a body that had been beaten to a pulp for the entertainment of others. He confessed that the pain wasn't just in his joints, but in the realization that his time was running out before he could say what truly mattered. To James, Doris was the only person who understood that his relaxed screen presence was actually a grueling, lifelong labor of will. The letter serves as a final, honest accounting of a man who was ready to let go of the Garner persona and return to being James Scott Bumgarner. The contents of the letter. A final confession. The letter Gigi Garner discovered was not a formal document or a polished piece of writing intended for a memoir. It was a raw, deeply personal correspondence written in the late 2000s. Likely after James's 2008 stroke, when his own mortality became an unavoidable reality. He addressed it to Doris Day because, in his eyes, she was the only person who truly understood the quiet loneliness of being a global icon. In these pages, the man known for his effortless charm finally dropped his guard. In the letter, James confessed that he had spent his entire life hiding behind a grin that was often a grimace. He admitted to Doris that the easygoing persona the world loved was a carefully constructed shell designed to protect a man who felt fundamentally out of place. One of the most striking revelations in the letter was his admission of lifelong anxiety regarding money and status, despite his wealth. The trauma of his Oklahoma childhood remained a permanent fixture in his psyche. He wrote, "I lived every day with the fear that I was a fraud, just a lucky drifter from Norman who didn't deserve the space I occupied. I kept working and fighting studios because I was terrified that if I stopped, the poverty of my youth would catch up with me." The letter also addressed the heavy toll of his career. James expressed a profound regret for the unnecessary punishment he put his body through for the sake of the studio system. He told Doris that he viewed his physical pain, the surgeries, the chronic aches, the limited mobility, as the price of admission for a life he wasn't sure he actually wanted. He described Hollywood as a grinder that stripped people of their dignity in exchange for a temporary spotlight. He confessed that the legal battles he famously fought weren't just about money. They were a desperate attempt to feel like he had some control over a life that felt increasingly owned by others. The most emotional portion of the letter was James's tribute to Doris's character. He thanked her for her unwavering kindness, which he described as a form of resistance against the cynicism of the film industry. He wrote, "In a town built on mirrors and smoke, you were the only real thing I could see. Your kindness was a protest. Doris, it reminded me that we didn't have to become what they wanted us to be." He concluded the letter with a poignant realization. "I've spent 80 years chasing something called fame, but as the lights dim, I see that kindness is the only thing that actually lasts. Everything else is just noise." For Gigi, reading these words was a transformative experience. She had always known her father was a man of integrity, but the letter revealed a vulnerability she had only glimpsed in fragments. It connected the dots of his entire life: the motherless boy in Oklahoma, the wounded soldier in Korea, the bruising stunts on the set of the Rockford Files, and the aging man in Brentwood, through his confession to Doris. James Garner was finally able to admit that he was tired of being the hero. To Gigi, the letter proved that her father's greatest act of bravery wasn't a stunt or a legal battle. It was the moment he finally allowed himself to be seen, not as a legend, but as a man who had done his best, despite his fears. Conclusion: beyond the fade out. James Garner's legacy is often measured in Emmy wins, box office totals, and the enduring popularity of characters like Brett Maverick and Jim Rockford. However, the revelation of his private letter to Doris Day suggests a far more profound metric for his life: the quiet triumph of authenticity over artifice. James was a man of the Midwest who became an icon of the West, yet he never lost the grounded resilience he forged in the red dirt of Oklahoma. He remains a symbol of a rare kind of Hollywood integrity, a man who would rather sue a billion-dollar studio for a matter of principle than compromise his dignity for a steady paycheck. The letter serves as a stark reminder that the effortless charm the world saw on screen was the result of immense personal effort. It reframes his career not as a series of lucky breaks, but as a long, disciplined struggle against the physical pain of his stunts and the psychological weight of his past. For James, the accolades were secondary to the human values of honesty and kindness. Through his words to Doris, he makes it clear that fame is a volatile and often hollow commodity. While the trust shared between two friends is the only true anchor in a life lived under a spotlight. As his daughter, Gigi Garner views the publication of these sentiments as the ultimate tribute to her father's character. She does not see the weakness he confessed in the letter as a flaw, but as the source of his true strength, by sharing his fears of inadequacy and his physical suffering. She allows him to live on, not as a two-dimensional hero, but as a complex, relatable human being. She invites the public to look past the cinematic J-turns and the smooth card tricks to see the man who valued his family and his principles above all else. His story is a call to reflect on the reality that exists behind the glamour. The idea that a life well lived is measured by what one preserves of oneself, rather than what one gives away to the masses. James Garner spent 86 years navigating the high-pressure machinery of global stardom. Yet he died with his soul and his integrity intact. The letter to Doris Day was his final act of clearing the air, a quiet exit from the stage on his own terms. He was no longer Maverick or Rockford. He was simply a man who had completed his service. He closed his final confession to Doris with a line that captures the essence of his journey. "We survived the noise, Doris." Maybe that's what really matters. It is a sentiment that serves as a fitting epitaph for a man who spent his life proving that character is the only thing the noise cannot drown out.